Well, Chris, it is a pleasure to be sitting down with you once more for our first one back at the top of the new year. Thanks for joining us.
Same. Glad to see you that you're here and healthy, as well as everyone else who's out there. COVID-19 has been surging, so just trying to make sure that we're going forward.
Totally. So, yeah, and we're going to get into, the COVID-19 conversation in regards to what we're doing because, with this first episode back at the top of the new year with Liberty is Peachy, we're doing a new series called At the Capitol, which is really like a roundup and a rundown of all the happenings at the Georgia Capitol as we go into the legislative state session. But I'm going to take it back a little bit to segue us into what's happening with session. Coming off of, the historic 2020 election, amid the pandemic, we had 1.3 million Georgians use the absentee ballot voting option alone, which is iconic and incredible. And here I was thinking, Chris, that, I'm so glad that we had this resource during the pandemic to keep people safe, to not have to be crowded in the polling locations. Like, great. So can you tell us about the piece of legislation regarding absentee ballot voting that has been put out?
Yes, happy to do that. So we know that earlier this week, a state senator had filed Senate Bill 29, which seeks to impose unnecessary and definitely harmful barriers to your right to vote. Now, rather than ensuring that this state makes it easier and more efficient for Georgia voters to participate in our nation's most treasured right of citizenship, a bill was introduced in the legislature to make it significantly more difficult for people to cast an absentee ballot.
And Chris, what could the ramifications for future elections be should a piece of legislation like this be passed?
Well, Senate Bill 29 requires you to submit a photocopy of your driver's license, either that with a voter ID, US passport, any other ways that you can do that. Here's the difficulty within this. Everyone does not have a scanner or a printer at home. So with the people who don't have that, you're clearly being disenfranchised because you may not have the access or the wealth to purchase one of these pieces of information.
Thanks for that tidbit. I hadn't even added in that layer of perspective to the situation. And I'm thinking just again about the sheer scale and the examples of usefulness of the absentee ballot, system in these past elections. So I'm curious to know if you had any more insight or thoughts on, the impact of, doing of manipulating that system one way or the other could do, and just the scale of the amount of Georgians that used it.
Well, yes, and I want to give a more specific example dealing with this situation. If you're a resident of the city of Atlanta, you would have voted about 6 times within this past year. So during a surge in COVID-19 and the pandemic, you had 1.3 million Georgians choose a safe option, which is voting absentee ballots during the general election. And then you had another election with 1.1 million people also doing a safe option of voting absentee ballot.
Wow.
So voting absentee ballot is clearly shown as a way to make sure that during these difficult times, you can vote safely. And let me remind you, if you're a City of Atlanta resident, you do have a mayoral and a municipal election coming up in 2021. So COVID-19 may not be over at that time. We still need this efficient and safe process of absentee ballots.
Absolutely. And thanks for those added points. Thanks a lot for that. So I want to pivot now to another piece of legislation that I know you have a personal connection to because it connects back to the Ahmaud Arbery case, and that's the citizens arrest law. So could you give us a bit of an update on any movement that's going on with that?
Yes, Governor Brian Kemp in his State of the State address talked about the citizens arrest statute, which again is the statute that the killers of Ahmaud Arbery are trying to use as a defense. Governor Kemp has signaled that this statute is out of date and it needs to be modernized or taken out of place in any form or fashion. As we know, it has a racist past towards it when this was passed during the Jim Crow era in Georgia history. Other states in the South were doing the same thing. specifically used to hunt and terrorize Black people. So now in 2021, we're finally addressing this issue, which is so pivotal.
And Chris, what is our position on the citizens arrest law as ACLU of Georgia?
We feel the citizens arrest statute is completely unnecessary and needs to be reformed altogether or taken out altogether to make sure that, again, Black people are no longer terrorized in the state of Georgia.
Gotcha. And were there any other pieces that we are focusing on as far as legislative session? Any other priorities that we have moving into session?
There are a lot of bills that have been dropped. We talked about some good bills and we talked about some bad bills. We're still looking at privacy within it. Of course, reproductive rights and women's health care is always a priority for us, and racial justice and criminal justice as well. The thing that I would like to lead with is we can only do this with the help of the people who are listening to this podcast.
Totally.
Our power derives from the people, and the people are not exercising that, and we won't see the needed changes that we can have in this state.
Absolutely. And for our supporters and our listeners, the best way to stay up to date on ways that you can get involved and lend your voice is to stay connected to our social channels on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ACLU of GA. And that's where you will have all the latest actions that you can take to help ensure democracy for us all moving forward. And Chris, it's always a pleasure having you on To Liberty is Peachy. Once again, I know as we move forward into session and into the spring, there'll be plenty of other things to talk about, and we'll be right here and happy to have you on once again.
Oh, yeah, there will be plenty. I know, I'll leave you with this last thought. Georgians went out and they voted.
Yeah.
And they won. Just the sheer mass of the amount of people shows a win in Georgia. Now it's time to hold your elected officials accountable.
That's
so
right.
Voting was the easy part. Now let's get to work.
That's right. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, friends, that takes care of another episode. Thanks so much for listening. We've got big fights ahead of us as we go into the 2021 legislative session, and your support is critical. To add your name to be the first to find out how you can take action around causes that matter most to you, visit acluga.org/pledge. To stay up to date on all the work we do here at the ACLU of Georgia, visit acluga.org. And be sure to follow us across social media at ACLU of GA. Last but certainly not least, be sure to follow, rate, like, or subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. Just give ACLU of Georgia a search. Until next time, this is your host, Kenyatta, reminding you to listen like your rights depend on it.